Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hello. I wanted to record a really quick intro to today's podcast. The podcast episode today is a really good one. It was a hard one for me to record. I had to call in some support from my BFF in Calgary, Megan. And so she is here as a co-host for this episode, kind of helping me tell my own story around recurrent pregnancy loss and miscarriage. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. I encourage you to listen to it, whether that's something that you've struggled with yourself or not. I know you know someone who has been through it. I know you know someone who has had a pregnancy loss, maybe more than one. And I think it's an area where we really can make some improvements in terms of how we support women. And I'm hoping that my story and some of the lessons I learned along the way and some of the lessons that Megan learned as my main support person through all of this, which happened over the course of about 8 years for me, will be really insightful and helpful to everyone listening to this, and will help you as you go forward support other women, whether that's your friends, your sister, maybe even your daughter someday. So please take a listen to this podcast. I think you're going to find it really interesting. And while it was a hard story for me to tell, I was very happy to tell it because I know that there's such strength in shared story. What I wanted to mention today in the introduction is that Sarah Bailey and I, she has been a co-host on this podcast many times. We talk about hormonal issues, perimenopause and menopause, and all of the stuff that goes with that for women. We are creating a new program that we're going to be running together. We have hinted about that in some of the previous podcast episodes. You've probably heard us talking about that. I've been getting lots of inquiries about that. And what we've done is we've opened up an official wait list. The details of that program are still being worked through, so I can't share any of those with you, but I can tell you that it's going to be amazing because Sarah's amazing, and I have so much experience supporting busy women now through my burnout coaching practice that I think the two of us together, her knowledge and skill set and my coaching experience, and our easy relationship that we have together is going to make this just a fantastic program. I think it's going to be one of a kind. So if you are interested in getting on the wait list for that program, all you need to do is go to wendymccallum.com/list. That's WENDYMCCALLUM/list. Pop your name on the list and you'll be one of the first people to know when the program is actually opening up for registration. There's a pretty good chance numbers will be limited in this program, at least for the first time that we run it. So if it's something you're interested in, I really recommend that you get on that wait list. Again, it's wendymccallum.com/list. Now, without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's podcast episode. Hi, everyone. I'm here today with a really special guest. I have my oldest, in the nicest way of that word, friend Megan here. She lives in Calgary and she has been my other sister now since I met her. And we are going to talk about a topic that I want to introduce first. And the reason I want to introduce it first is because it's a sensitive topic. And I know that there are going to be women listening to this podcast for whom this is really close to their heart. And you may, in fact, have had a recent experience with this. So I just want to give you the heads up before you keep listening that we're going to be talking about recurrent pregnancy loss today, my story in particular. And that is why I have Megan on today. This is a topic that I think I'm pretty much healed from. It doesn't feel nearly as raw as it did 5 or 6 years ago, but also really personal to me. And I thought it would be helpful to have Megan on for a couple of reasons. First of all, to help me tell this story hopefully we'll do it in a concise way, but we're not the best at that. But we're going to try. And then also she has some really great insight herself because she was there with me through every single one of these losses, and also there for me for the joyous moments that I had along the way, including the birth of my daughter and the adoption of my son. So I think she has a lot of insight as a support person in this. And my goal with this podcast is twofold. One, I want to share my story because I believe in the power of shared story. It's something that has helped me get through a lot of different things in my life. And I have a story that I think will be helpful to other women to hear. So there's that. But then the other piece of it is I've learned a lot along the way. I've had lots of great experiences through this and lots of not so great experiences. And I want to share that in the hopes that it will help maybe make some change, even on a small scale, but help you support women in your life who are going through this, because 1 in 4 pregnancies result in a loss. And I think that's probably a conservative statistic. So you know someone who's been through this. I know you do. Maybe you've been through this yourself, and you probably know many women actually who've gone through this. And my hope is that between Megan and I today, we can give you some helpful insight, I guess, into how to support people who are going through the same thing. If you're a healthcare practitioner and you're listening to this podcast, and I know there are many of you who do listen to this podcast, I am hoping that today you pick up some things that might help you to support your patients through this, because I've had some great experiences in the medical healthcare system and some not so great experiences. So we want to share that insight as well today. So that's enough about the topic. I want to introduce Megan now. Hi, Megan.
Hey, girl.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. We feel really weird about this, you guys. This is the first time we've ever done this. And we were just talking about how we basically talk to each other all the time. And I think we've had like maybe 1 or 2 FaceTimes / Zoom calls the entire pandemic. So we don't usually look at each other's face.
That's weird.
So it's weird that we're sitting here looking at each other today doing this. And also this feels super formal for us because we've just never done anything like structured like this. So we're going to do our best with it. So why don't you start, Meg, and kind of tell the story as you remember it of how we met and became friends, and leave out the stuff. Like, remember, our kids are going to listen to this podcast.
PG. Yeah. So Wendy and I have known each other for what seems like forever now, but we met in high school. So I am from Halifax and Wendy's from Halifax. So we met in high school and we were friends, sort of generally friends in high school. And then we became super tight the year. So I went away and I came back and we became very, very close. I guess my first year of university age. And I feel like we spent every waking moment together.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew that year that Wendy was my soul sister. And then so we spent that year together. Then she went traveling. I moved to BC. We stayed in touch when I was in BC. She moved to Calgary. I subsequently moved to Calgary, and we have been in love since then. Well, we've been in love. We've been in deep love since then.
We have been in deep love. But the really interesting piece of the story too, I mean, that's great. Thank you, Megan. I feel exactly the same way. But the really interesting part of the story is that our husbands have also been in deep love for this whole
since they were 18.
Yeah. So when Megan left Halifax to go tree planting in BC, I was totally devastated. I was so sad. We were supposed to travel to Australia together, me, Megan, and another friend of ours, Robin. And Megan decided that wasn't in the cards for her, and she was going to go make some money in BC. And I was so sad. Ended up going to Australia with Robin. We had a great time, but really missed Megan during all of that. But it turned out to be really a pivotal decision in Megan's life, because she met her other soulmate, Jack. And
so I'm also in deep love with.
She is in deep love with him. Shout out to Jack. And Jack was roommates at University of Victoria with this guy called Rob. And when I was on my way out, I feel like on my way to Australia, I stopped and visited you because I had a ticket that allowed me to stop a couple of times. It was like they used to have these like around the world tickets where you could stop a few times. So anyway, we had bought a ticket that allowed me to stop. And so we stopped in Victoria and I visited you. And that's the first time I met my now husband, Rob. And that was like, wow, probably.
Well, I've been with Jack for 28 years. So 28 years ago.
And you know, it was just a passing. We just met each other at a party kind of thing, passing thing. Went to Australia for 6 months, came back. I think I probably saw him again on the way back because I stopped on the way home again. And then I went on to go to law school, graduated from law school, went out to Calgary to article, lived there for a year. And Megan sent me a message and said, Jack and I are moving to Calgary. And I was so excited because, just because I was excited to have them there. And because I didn't really know very many people in Calgary. The only people I knew were my law co-workers and some people I met through the articling course. So they came out, and lo and behold, Rob started going to the parties at their house, and I got to know Rob again. And then eventually, after a few years of that, Rob and I went on our first double date with Megan and Jack to see, do you remember? Rob still talks about it. It was Valentine's Day, and we went to see, I cannot remember the name of the movie, but it basically involves Tommy Lee Jones carrying someone's head around in a duffel bag.
Oh, with Gwyneth Paltrow.
Could be. I don't know. Least romantic movie out there. And we went to see that. I don't remember. A Simple Plan, maybe, or something. Anyway, whatever. We went to see that movie, and the rest is history. Yeah. So Rob and I were in Megan's wedding, and Megan and Jack were forefront in our wedding. And we have been really just mutual, all of us best friends since then. So it's kind of a cool story.
It is a cool story.
It is a cool story. And in the course of all of that.
And it's a cool story that we're in deep love, and those two are in deep love. And here we are. It's actually a super cool story.
It is a cool story. And I talk a lot on this podcast about the importance of my female friendships to me, like how important those are. And I think, you know, obviously my marriage and my relationship with Rob is really important, and my relationships with my kids are really important, but I think it's really important for me, and I think for all women, to nurture and value the relationships that they have with women. And obviously I really value our relationship. It's been like through what we're going to talk about today, really, I don't even know how to describe it. I cannot imagine having gone through what I went through without you there with me. So Meg has 3 daughters. They're like my other kids. So she has 3 grown daughters now. She has the lovely Ella, and she has the incredible Evie. And then she has I don't even know how to describe Kate. She's got like the most wonderful personality, Kate. So Kate is a little younger than Georgia, but they're all in the same grade. So all the 3, my 2 and Kate are in grade 11. So through the course of all of this story that we're going to tell you, we also ended up having 5 beautiful kids, which we're both so grateful for. And now I'm just basically trying to avoid telling this story. I was saying to Megan before we got started, I'm a little bit nervous about this today. I have shared this story once before. I shared it in a Facebook Live about 5 years ago when I realized I had a pretty big following. I felt like I wasn't doing anything meaningful with social media. I was just, you know, sharing recipes and health tips. And I just wanted to do something with this audience that I had built. And I decided, because it was, I think at the time it was early pregnancy and infant loss awareness month, maybe. And I decided to do a Facebook Live. And I remember I was just petrified. I was shaking when I was doing it. I had never talked about this before. And I got an incredible response from that. I had so many private messages about it from women who just said, thank you for sharing your story. And then they told me their story, or they were trying to support a sister or a friend who was going through the same thing, and they found it helpful. But also lots of messages from healthcare workers who found it really helpful just to hear the patient's side of the experience. So I always knew when I started this podcast, I would do an episode on this, but I've been resisting it for whatever reason. Anyway, we're doing it today. So let's get started. Help me go through the chronology of this, Megan.
Okay.
You had Ella. Then so Rob and I got married. We started trying to have kids. We did not get pregnant quickly or easily. So I think we were many months into it before we finally got pregnant. So much so that I don't remember exactly how long it took, but we had started to talk to the fertility clinic because at the time I was a lawyer and I was doing, I did almost all of the legal work for the Calgary Fertility Clinic. I was doing their surrogacy contracts for them, and knew the director of the fertility clinic. And kind of was having conversations with him on the side, like, should I be worried about this? I'm not getting pregnant. Anyway, we did finally get pregnant, and our first pregnancy, we found out about it. We were on a trip to Spain together. We were there for 2 weeks, and Rob and I, not Meg. Megan was not there.
It's not Spain.
We were in Spain, and my period was late, and I just had this feeling something was different. And I said to Rob, I think there's a chance I'm pregnant. We went to the pharmacy, got a pregnancy test, and I was in fact pregnant. We were so happy. I just remember being so excited. I probably called you. Do you remember?
I don't remember that. I remember
yeah. I think I did. I called my parents. I probably called you. You're probably the other person I called to tell that we were pregnant because we were so excited. We went through that trip. I was really sick. I did not feel great during the trip, but it was still like so ecstatic. Came home, and the first one, I feel like, I don't know if I had an ultrasound or not. I can't remember what happened. I think because it was the first one, I wouldn't have had an ultrasound. And I was at like 11 and a half weeks. I remember that because
Jack and I had a barbecue with like Marty and Pete Nat and you and Rob.
Yeah.
Announced your pregnancy at the barbecue. So you must have been, I'm going to say 11 and a half, close to 12 weeks. Because
it was very
felt
close
a bit
to
nervous.
12. Yeah, it was very close to 12 weeks. And then at some point I started spotting and realized that the pregnancy might be in trouble, and went to the hospital, and they did an ultrasound, and I was told that the pregnancy wasn't viable anymore.
And that was like 2 days after that barbecue.
Yeah.
The timing was super weird.
The timing's always weird for me on this stuff. That's going to be clear as we continue telling the story.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was completely and utterly blindsided by that. I was not prepared for it. It never crossed my mind I was going to lose the pregnancy. I remember being completely shocked. There's nothing worse than being in an ultrasound room and having this technologist who has no relationship with you. You've never seen this person before. Tell you that the pregnancy is not viable and you've had a miscarriage. I don't know. It's really, really hard. I don't remember too much about that, Megan, except that I was gutted. And I remember going into like kind of a depression after that. And Rob was devastated too. Obviously, we were both devastated. So I don't have a ton of memories around that. I remember lying on the couch in the living room of the house that we lived in at the time and listening to a particular song. Like, I have some very specific memories, but then a lot of memories. A lot of that time has just kind of been, I don't know if I've blacked it out or whatever, just got superseded probably by the other ones. What do you remember about that?
So Wendy and I, weirdly, when we lived in Calgary, we've always lived very close to each other. And so a lot of my memories around your experiences have been me walking from my house to your house and me stealing myself to make sure that when I see you, I'm appropriate, I guess. And so I can remember walking to your house with 2 cooling trays, and I feel like a Dido CD.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny because the song I remember listening to was Dido. So that's probably right. What's a cooling tray? What are you talking about?
Like cooling racks.
Oh, for cookies?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because you used to bake a lot. And so it was weird, right? Like, how do you, and I didn't want to minimize or like have our relationship change based on this terrible news. And so I wanted to be normal and not like stroke your hair, because I never would have stroked your hair in the first place.
That would have been weird.
That would have been super weird. So how do I support you in this horrific time in a way that feels supportive, but doesn't feel belittling or minimizing or trite? So it was baking trays, like cooling racks and Dido, because you were a baker and maybe you're going to bake some cookies. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you remember that. That's because that's a really good example of just generally what I remember about all of the things that I've gone through. And I've been through everything with Megan, you guys. So not just this pregnancy losses. I've been through, my mom's cancer. I've been through the death of my dad. I've been through.
I texted your mom the other day, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Megan texts my mom. God love her. She texts my mom to check in on her all the time. Anyway, what I remember about you and the way that you provide support is exactly that it's nothing different from what you would do in any other day when I am feeling down. It's the same approach. And I don't know how you articulate that to give advice to other people in supporting their friends, it's just be yourself. And the one thing that I know from having gone through this so many times is that there is nothing you can say to make a person feel better. Like there are no specific words that you can say. And there are some specific words that make things 10 times worse. So for example, telling someone they can try again is not helpful in that moment. Telling someone this is God's plan is definitely not helpful, especially when the person that you're speaking to is not necessarily
feeling God's plan.
Believer in God's plan. Yeah. So, those types of sentiments are not really helpful. And if you've said them to people in the past and you're listening to this podcast, I don't want to make you feel guilty about that. I just want you to know going forward, like just be yourself and try your best to just try to keep things normal, because it can become very weird when you're that person who's gone through that. I mean, there's a whole bunch of weird emotion going through your head. So you're devastated. There's an incredible amount of grief. And I always say it's not so much grief of the loss of the baby. It wasn't for me anyway. It wasn't like grief of the loss of a baby. It was grief of the loss of the dream. It was the dream that I had for that baby. It was like the way that was how everything was going to change over the next, year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years as a result of that child being born, how we were going to have a different Christmas this year, how we were going to have a different vacation, how, all of that stuff, how I was going to go on a maternity leave from work. All of those things were the things that I was grieving. And it was really more like what I thought life was going to be like with this baby. And so there isn't anything you could say to make it better, but you do need to show up. So that's the one thing I would say. Like there were a few people who just never showed up. And I noticed that. I noticed it. I don't hold a grudge or anything, but it does affect how your relationship is going forward with those people. Like you have to show up when someone is in pain. You have to just show up and let them know that you're there. And I think it's great that you brought me the cookie trays. I don't remember that, but I think it's probably a good thing I didn't.
Yeah.
Because I do remember every time somebody did something really inappropriate or insensitive. Those are the things that are like burned into my memory. But all of the kind things that people did, they all added up over time. Yeah. And so with that one, I just remember being very sad. The other emotion I was going to say that goes along with it is there is a kind of an embarrassment emotion around it, because you've now told everybody and now you have to go back and like untell everybody.
And the timing was so weird of that barbecue. It just seems so.
Yeah, I know it is
weird.
That happened to me more than once. The other thing I should share in relation to this, because I'm pretty sure it was this miscarriage. It might have been another one, but we had a really great friend at the time, Drew, who did something that was really nice. It was one of the things that I do remember. And if you're looking for a way to support women, I think this is a really nice way to support women. And I've done it myself since. She dropped off a bag at the front door. She didn't ring the doorbell. She didn't require me to get up and have a conversation with her. This was right afterwards. It was very fresh. Which I really appreciated, but she left a bag at the door and then probably sent an email or something to say, there's a bag at the front door for you. And she just had bought me a really nice journal and left it in a bag with a note that said something like, you probably have a lot of things on your mind right now. Maybe it would help to write some of them down. And I thought that was a really thoughtful, really, really thoughtful response. But I'll tell you, the things that stand out are that the people who showed up. I remember my mom and dad got on a plane and came. Do you remember that? My mom and dad got on a plane and came after the first miscarriage, which they came from Nova Scotia to Calgary. They had not a lot of extra money to spare, and they spent it on plane tickets to come out because they were so devastated and wanted to be able to support me, which was amazing. Anyway, we got through that first loss, and at some point we decided to start trying again, and I got pregnant again. And I really remember very little about the second one. It's the one I remember the least about. Do you remember anything about that one?
I certainly don't remember the timeline.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was pregnant with Eve. I don't know.
Well, you might've been actually pregnant with Eve. You probably were pregnant with Eve, or you'd already had Eve. So the other thing that's happening in the course of this, and this
I'm having kids. Yeah. Right. Like
in the course of all of this for me, and this is happening for most women who are going through infertility or pregnancy loss, is that their friends are having babies. So their friends, their sisters are having babies. My sister had not had a baby yet. And Megan had already had Ella, who I absolutely loved. She was like Wendy was her mom. Baby. Yeah, I love her so much. I love all of them, but I had Ella was kind of my first baby. You probably had Eve at this point. So the person who's going through the losses or struggling with infertility is also trying to be there for their friends who are having the babies. And that is challenging. It is really tough. And I think as the person who's having the babies, having some sensitivity to the fact that it's tough is really important. And Megan was the most incredible person in this regard. So sensitive to all of this with me. I mean, just really went above and beyond, like probably was thinking about me more than she was thinking about herself in a lot of these moments, which, again, that's pretty special friendship. But I think you need to recognize that all the things that involve babies are hard when you've just lost a pregnancy, all of them. The baby showers are hard. Going to the hospital to visit the new mom is really hard. I cannot tell you how many times I did that over those years. And it is a bittersweet thing. Anyway, the second pregnancy, I kept quiet. I'm sure I do know that, even though I can't remember it. I'm sure I kept it super quiet because I didn't want anyone to know about that, because I didn't want to have to do all the explaining. And I was probably terrified that it was going to fail, and probably spent the entire, however many weeks it was before I did lose that pregnancy, trying to confirm that I was still pregnant. So constantly, and this is, your mind becomes consumed by it. Am I still pregnant? Do I feel the same way I did yesterday? Checking to make sure there's no bleeding constantly, like any little pain or discomfort. Oh, what's going on? Is something going wrong? And I don't remember how I found out I was miscarrying that one. I don't know if it was at an ultrasound. I think it might've been.
And I can't remember if that was the one where they not biopsied, but they did a test on the material.
Yeah.
There's one.
Yeah, there was one. It was probably after that.
And I don't know if it was that one or not.
Yeah.
Because I know that didn't happen with the first one. Anyway, that was just a thing that I noticed, because he said that the material was female. That was one of the takeaways from one of those losses. And for some reason, that stuck in my head.
Yeah, geez, it's so funny. I don't even remember that, Megan. I think it just, all this stuff just gets subsumed in the next one. But I do remember that they did and that was really just because I was connected with the fertility clinic, I think, and they were able to do that test for me. They were trying to determine if there were any chromosomal abnormalities that might be causing these. Normally you would not have that test after.
No, and I think that it was either the second or the third one. But I feel like it was the second one, because I think by the third one, it was like, oh man,
but by the third one, I had already had Georgia. This is the weird thing. So I had the 2 miscarriages, and the second one was just devastating for Rob and I. We were like, I felt like I was never going to be able to have a baby.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think that's why that testing was part of that one, because it was this is when you were full lawyer mode, and it was very, when you can't control something, you're going to try to control things. So I think that test was an important part of understanding the loss.
Yeah, probably.
Right. Like kind of, I don't know, compartmentalizing it or boxing it or.
Yeah, probably. I definitely was trying to control it. And I was in like full risk management mode. I was like, okay, how am I going to have this baby? Like, what are the chances I'm actually going to have this baby through my own pregnancy and birth? And it was feeling like the chances were really slim. And Rob and I had weirdly, again, I think the universe works in weird ways. We had talked before we even got married. We'd had a conversation in a pub. I still remember where we had it. We had a conversation about starting a family someday. And both of us said that we thought it would be really pretty amazing to adopt a child, which is bizarre. Most couples do not have that conversation, but we had it before we got married, before we had any idea we were going to have trouble having kids. None of this was on the radar. So after the second miscarriage, I went into like, how am I going to fix this mode? Which I think is probably common. A lot of people didn't like that. So I had people say things to me like, you just need to give yourself time to recover from this. And, it's too early and you don't know. And I found that to be highly frustrating. So I would suggest don't say those things to somebody who's going through this. And I just wanted to fix it. And I started, looking at statistics around miscarriage and all of this stuff. Anyway, Rob and I started talking at that point.
I can remember you talking about being on the other side of the stats and how weird that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was also a focus of the second pregnancy loss was
right.
You being on the other side of the stats.
Right. Because for the first
Yeah.
one, I was still like statistically normal. And the second one, I was like statistically not typical anymore. And certainly now, after the 4 that I've had, I'm not statistically typical. But anyway, we at that point started talking about adoption. Now, we were living in Alberta, and I want to be really clear about this. The Alberta adoption system at the time was very different than it is now. This was my son's 17, so it was 17 years ago. And they were just starting to move to open adoption. Which was, I think, pretty progressive for the provinces. So open adoption is an adoption process whereby the birth mother chooses the family for her child, chooses the adoptive family, meets with the adoptive family, and then there's some nature of openness post-adoption that's agreed upon between the two families. And that looks very different depending on the situation. In our situation, it was a very, very open adoption, but which means we had lots of contact post-birth with the birth family, my son's birth family. But at the time, it was actually possible to adopt a child within the province, which is not easy to do anywhere anymore. It's extremely difficult to adopt now. And at the time, there were babies being placed for adoption. It wasn't a sure thing by any means, but we were 32 years old. We were young, and we felt like we had a pretty good chance of being placed with a baby. And we were, as I said, extremely open to adoption. We thought it would be a great way to start a family. And we were just really excited about this. So we went and started going through the process of being approved as an adoption, as a family, which is its own. I mean, we could do another podcast on adoption. That's its own set of stress and whatever, because I've already had 2 pregnancies, and now I have to prove myself worthy as a parent. And that is a tough thing to go through mentally. But we went through that process and then got on the wait list eventually for a private open adoption. And then we were just waiting. And
you also did the provincial thing. You were on the wait list because
we did
on the wait list. I can't remember, but I remember you
went through the provincial. So this was the private system, which is where birth parents would actually choose. So it would be more of a consensual surrender, I guess is the best way. I don't know how to describe it, but the private system, that's the one that we were in. There's also the provincial system, which would have,
well, you guys looked at for a bit.
Yeah. Sometimes babies would come up for adoption through that system, but they would largely have been apprehended from homes a lot of the time. And anyway, we also went through that system, did all the training for that, which involved so much time. This is all we did basically for several months. And then I think we eventually decided I can't remember if we were actually on the public list or not, but we were definitely on the private list. Anyway, through the course of all of that, obviously did not get pregnant, we were working our way through that. Our plan was to start our family, hopefully with an adopted baby. Didn't know if it would be a newborn or not. And then in October of 2003, I do know the timing of this because it's all tied in with my son. In October of 2003, it was a Wednesday night, and I'd felt like something was off for a couple of days, and was not actively trying to get pregnant. Took a pregnancy test, was pregnant, had the weirdest response to that, which was, "This is so great. This is so awful." That was my response. I remember feeling totally torn. I called Rob. He was fishing in the Bow River. Called him on his cell phone. I said, "I just took a pregnancy test. I'm pregnant." And I think his response was something like, "Oh," because, we had just gone through so much already with this. And obviously we're not feeling super confident about this pregnancy. Plus we were on the wait list for the adoption. And we knew, which
was like just to interject for a second, a huge deal. Like, I remember the process of making the scrapbook. Like, it really was.
Oh yeah.
Aside from your work, that's kind of what we all
hundreds and hundreds of hours went into that.
So process. Just when you say you were on the wait list, there's a whole lot of work that went into getting on the wait list. That's
true. Tons of work that went into that. Anyway, so it was Wednesday in October. I found out I was pregnant. We were kind of like a little bit, again, blindsided by it. I remember I had a dinner at one of my partners at the law firm at their house that night. I went, had to like not drink and figure out how to not drink, which is his own, we could do another show on that. Because this is another thing, actually. Let's talk about this right now. first of all, you should never, ever ask somebody why they're not drinking, ever. I mean, I'm just so, as a person who doesn't drink anymore, don't ask people why they're not drinking. It's none of your business. And they're not drinking because they don't want to drink. And it doesn't matter what the reason is. It's a positive choice. Just give them what they want to drink. But you definitely don't want to be asking women in their childbearing years why they're not drinking. It's just insensitive. It can force them to feel like they have to disclose something they're not ready to disclose, whether that is that I'm trying to conceive, because a lot of women don't drink when they're trying to conceive, especially if they've had difficulty conceiving, or it can force them to admit that they are pregnant way before they want to share that they're pregnant, because if they're like me, they've already gone through several losses. So just keep that in mind. It's like, don't ask a woman if she's pregnant either. And don't ask a woman if she's trying to have kids or hoping to start a family. That's another question I got over and over during these years. Really insensitive question. When you know the statistics of how many women struggle to have a family, and men, but just how many parents are struggling to create a family, it's so insensitive to ask people when they're going to have a family or if they're hoping to have kids. It's not a good question to ask, period. Anyway, I had to go to this dinner and negotiate the whole drinking thing. Because of course, if you listen to the episode where I talk about my drinking story, my career in drinking really took off when my career in law started. They were intertwined, and drinking was a part of every event that I went to as a lawyer. And there was alcohol at this dinner I went to, and somehow I managed to negotiate my way through it. So went to that. And then Friday of the same week was at work and got a call from the adoption agency to say that there was a birth mom who was really looking forward to meeting us. I remember bursting into tears because I knew I had, and I did, I told them right away. I said, wow, okay, the timing of this could not be worse in many ways. I just took a pregnancy test 2 days ago and I'm pregnant. I didn't mean to get pregnant. I was absolutely going to let you guys know I was pregnant. I wasn't expecting a call this early from a birth mom. I think we've been on the list for about 6 months at this point, and we were anticipating it might take more like a year plus. And what I said to them was, as soon as I had an ultrasound that indicated this pregnancy might be viable, I was going to call you like at 9 weeks or whatever, but I'm only like literally 4 weeks pregnant. Like I'm barely pregnant here. And I said, I know you need to let the birth mom know that, because of course, many birth mothers want to place their children in homes where there are not biological children, because they're worried that there might be some kind of, favoritism being played there. They want their child to be the first child in the family. And I got all of that. I was really clear about all of that. So I said, you have to let her know this. But you need to know that there's a very good chance this pregnancy will not go anywhere. And they said, well, we have to talk to the birth mom. We've never dealt with this situation before. We have to talk to the birth mother. I remember I hung up the phone and I just crumpled on the floor, and I was just crying. I was bawling. I was so upset. And I was thinking to myself, I'm going to lose this baby that I'm carrying. I'm going to lose this baby that I just felt like he was supposed to be our baby. And I called Rob and I couldn't even talk. And Rob was working downtown and he said, I'm coming over, and he was over in my office and the two of us were sitting in there crying. And the adoption worker called back and said she'd spoken to the family. They were going to think about it over the weekend. And if they still wanted to meet with us, they were going to let us know they had our phone number. So I spent the next 48 hours I think the lowest point of my life ever, I'm going to say. I would say they were the lowest 2 days of my life. And I remember, I want you to tell this part of the story because you were a big part of this, Megan. I remember it was Thanksgiving weekend. So it was a long weekend. And I think it was Sunday morning, because I'd been 2 days and they hadn't called. So I was like, they're not going to call. This is not going to happen. And Rob was outside raking leaves and I was in the kitchen and I was on the phone with you, and I was really, really upset. Do you remember that?
Gutted, like sobbing, couldn't really understand you. I said, I'm coming over.
Yeah.
We hung up the phone. Again, in a new place. I had Eve by this time because Eve was 5 months old when we moved into that house. So,
yeah.
So I took the back alley there are lots of alleys in Calgary. So I took the back alley to Wendy's house again, thinking that I'm going to have to, it was so crazy actually. So as I'm leaving my house and going to Wendy's house, it probably took 3 minutes. We were very close, thinking I'm going to have to scoop my my best friend up off the floor. And so it was super weird. And then I got there and she was the happiest she'd been in years. So I just remember that. So anyway,
remember I had a yellow Post-it note and I put a happy face on it and I had it up against the window, the back window of the kitchen. And so when Megan came around through the gate in the backyard, she could see me and I was on the phone, I was smiling and I had the happy face thing up on the window because in the 3 minutes between when Megan said I'm on my way and we hung up and she got to my house, my son's birth mother had called and I was literally on the phone with her when Megan came in. And we had a long conversation and I'm not going to go into the details of it, but in and I do have permission from her to share this, just, in an anonymous way. She's very happy to share our story in the hopes that it will help other people who are considering open adoption, because we have that is an amazing story on its own. And maybe Megan will come back and help me tell that one at some point. But she said in the course of the conversation, I had said to her, I was so worried you weren't going to call. I was so worried that the fact that I'm pregnant was going to be the deterring factor for you. And she told me that they were actually delighted that I was pregnant and very hopeful that I would have this baby, because the one thing that was missing from our file was the fact that we did not already have a child. And it was so important to her that her child had a sibling, because she had grown up with a sibling and she just thought that that was really, really important. And everything else in our file was perfect, except the fact that we didn't already have a baby. And she was worried that but anyway, they had gotten over that and decided, well, this is the family for us. And so when they got this information that I was actually pregnant, they were really excited about it. And they were really hopeful that I would be able to have this baby, because that would kind of be the perfect scenario for them. So, I mean, it really was meant to be. I do believe that all of these matches are meant to be. And that one was meant to be. And long story short, she ended up having a baby about a month later on November 11th. And that's my son, Duncan. And when I went for Duncan's birth, which we missed because it was a snowstorm and we couldn't get there in time, but we got there, I don't know, maybe an hour after he was born. When we went, I was 9 weeks pregnant with my daughter, and I had just had an ultrasound that week that had shown a heartbeat. And that was exciting for me because we had not seen a heartbeat before. So every ultrasound I'd had before that, there was no heartbeat, but I've had many ultrasounds after that where I've had a heartbeat and it hasn't ended in a birth. So, but at that moment, I was feeling somewhat confident about the pregnancy, not super confident because I was only 9 weeks, but we went and Duncan was born. And 7 months after that, Georgia was born. It was a very stressful pregnancy for me, though. I do want to focus in on that part of it because the nerves and worry are still there. So if you're supporting somebody who has had a miscarriage or had a couple of miscarriages and is now pregnant, and it looks like that pregnancy is going to go to term, you need to be sensitive around the fact that this is not a normal, typical pregnancy, probably for that person. They are probably terrified that it's going to end. Because that's how I was through that whole thing. Oh my gosh, Megan, how many times did I call or you or Rob or whatever and say the baby stopped moving? I mean, it was constant. I was constantly worried that something was going to happen with that pregnancy. And it was terrifying. And the birth was terrifying for me. I remember saying when she was born, is she alive? I don't think most mothers say that when their baby's born. I actually said that because I was terrified that something was going to go wrong with that. So that's another thing to keep in mind if you're supporting somebody through pregnancy to term. And that person has been through losses. They're probably not experiencing that pregnancy the same way you experience that pregnancy as somebody who's never had a loss. Anyway,
I agree with that. Yeah.
Very joyous, very amazing year for me. 2003, 2004 was the craziest year of my life. Really the best, just the most amazing year. Finally had not just one kid, I had 2 kids in 7 months, which was nuts. And it was just so incredible. What happened after that was it took me probably 3 years just to see the light, because I had these 2 kids who were 7 months apart, and that was my life for years. And as I've said on other podcasts, right in between these 2 kids, I was made partner at the firm. So I also had to go back to work, of course, after my maternity leave, to a very high stress, high responsibility job. And it was a lot. And in the course of all of this, I now know that it was beginning my burnout, my own burnout, although at the time I didn't see it as that, but this all contributed to burnout. It doesn't have to be bad stuff that leads to burnout, you guys. Good stuff, good stress leads to burnout too. All stress is stress. It all causes the same reaction in your body. I had a lot of really great stress in a very short period of time. And, there's a lot of adrenaline and cortisol coursing through my body through all of that adoption stuff, through obviously those 2 pregnancies and pregnancy losses. Those were highly stressful and traumatic events. I was just saying to Meg before we pressed record on this, only in the last year, I've been spending a lot of time talking about kind of trauma, and researching trauma and reading about trauma, because of course, many of my clients have everyone's been through trauma is the point I want to make here. Like, everyone's been through trauma. We talk about like big T trauma and little T trauma, and there are differences in the types of trauma, but I have yet to meet a woman, especially in the work that I do, who has not been through trauma. And what I've realized in the last year or two is that these were all traumas for me. These were all their own small T traumas, but the succession, like the series of these traumas and all of the things that came in, all of these contributed to my end burnout. And they definitely contributed to my over-reliance on alcohol. There's no question about it, because I wasn't drinking during these pregnancies. And then when the pregnancy ended, I would be like, well, fuck it. The only good thing is that now I can drink. So I'm going to drink. And that happened after every one of these. Anyway, we went through that. I think it took me about 3 years, like I said, to kind of get through the early stages of the kids. I think it was probably when they were around 3 that we decided to try again. I really wanted to know what it was like to just have a baby and not have it wrapped in all of this like crazy trauma and stress and everything that went on. And also not to have to be caring for another infant at the same time, because of course, the whole time I was caring for Duncan, because we brought him home 2 days after we was born, we brought him home. And I was at the time, like 9 weeks pregnant. Like I said, my entire pregnancy with Georgia, I was caring for an infant. I was up all night, every night through the entire pregnancy, because I had this newborn baby that I was taking care of. So I just wanted to know what it was like, to just have a baby, like a typical kind of baby. I don't know what I thought was going to be typical about it. I had 2 3-year-olds, but anyway, we tried to get pregnant, and we did get pregnant again. We told no one. Did you know? You probably knew. You did.
Probably.
This was the one, do you remember, where I had to put myself in a cab and go to the hospital by myself? So this one, we got pregnant. I don't remember when I miscarried this one. Some of my miscarriages most of them were at around like 11 and a half weeks, right before the 12-week mark. One of them was after. You know what? I actually think, Megan, the first one was after 12 weeks. And I think that's
I think the reason why we had the barbecue was because you were announcing your pregnancy, and it was like in a safe time, I think
you're right. I think it was, I think the first one was after 12
and
weeks.
Funnily and weirdly, so Wendy would look pregnant very quickly. Yeah. Which was tricky, because when you don't want to tell people that you're pregnant, once you've suffered a loss, it's difficult when you look like you're pregnant early. Yeah. So I do remember that you also, like when you were 12 weeks pregnant, you looked 12 weeks pregnant, but also when you were 7 weeks pregnant,
you looked 12 weeks. I looked 12 weeks pregnant.
Yeah. I can remember that was a difficult time, because I would know and Rob would know, but no one else would know. And you would try to manage.
Yeah. I wore overalls a lot.
Yeah.
For those
mind you, it was the early 2000s, so that was the thing. But
overalls were okay. Thank God for overalls.
She was kind of pushing the limit of the overall from an era perspective.
But that's another thing for people to know, right?
But I do remember that you were visibly pregnant earlier than a lot of people, which was a challenge, because your pregnancies were always so precarious.
Yeah.
So how do you physically manage being pregnant?
Tough. Yeah. I was always trying to hide it. I was always trying to hide everything. I was trying to hide, not drinking. I would try to hide that so that people wouldn't suspect that I was pregnant. I tried to hide that. That definitely happened with me.
Wearing overalls in 2005.
Yeah. Well, you can't wear them to work. So you can't wear them to the law office. So I would have, had, safety pin my skirt at that point. Because for whatever reason, I did always show really, really early in my pregnancies. And if you saw me at the end of my pregnancy with Georgia, that would make sense, because I was absolutely massive. Yeah. But anyway, that it's something to, don't comment on that. Yeah. Don't comment. And it's, women can look pregnant for many different reasons. This is something else that I've learned over the years. You can look pregnant because you're pregnant. But even then, it's nobody's business until you're ready to tell them. You can look pregnant because you just had a miscarriage. I've also had people ask me when I'm due after I've had a miscarriage. Not sure it gets any worse than that. That's a pretty tough thing to respond to. Women who have gluten intolerances can look pregnant. Like there are so many different reasons why our stomachs swell like that. And it's just really a bad idea to guess that someone's pregnant ever. Some women are just shaped like that. You have to be really careful with that. Yeah, that's a good point, Megan. I forgot about that, but
and I just remember that was part of the trauma of being pregnant, not wanting anyone to know you're pregnant, and trying to manage that whole piece.
Yeah. So anyway, with that one, I think I had an ultrasound at some point, maybe an early ultrasound or.
Yes. I think after the first one, I always
had a 9 or 10 week ultrasound. Anyway, at some point I might have had a heartbeat in the first one. And then the next one I didn't. I can't remember the timing of that. At some point I was told that the pregnancy wasn't viable. Again, devastating. Doesn't get any easier. It's not any easier because you already have kids. That's another thing I want to say. Like, it doesn't help for someone to come and say, well, you're blessed with the 2 that you have. None of that is helpful in the moment. It still feels like a serious loss.
And also Wendy wanted to have 3 kids. So it was like the loss of what she envisioned her family to look like.
Yeah.
I think like you wanted to have 3 kids for a really long time. And so it wasn't like the loss of the baby again. It was like the loss of the vision of what your life was going to look like.
Yeah. I had a really specific idea in my mind as to what our family was going to look like, which I've learned is a bad idea because they never really look exactly the way you want them to look like. And I'm very delighted, I should say now, when I look back, I'm very, very happy and grateful for the family that I have. But at the time, this was really important to me. And this is really what I wanted. And I had a dream around this, and Rob and I had a dream around this. And so we were gutted when we had this 3rd miscarriage. I actually think that what happened with that one is that they told me it was going to pass naturally. I think I miscarried kind of naturally. The other 2, I had a D&C, which is I cannot say what it is. I cannot remember. Dilate
Cutteridge.
Cutteridge? Yeah. What is it?
Cutteridge, I think.
What's the D for?
Dilate
and Cutteridge. Terrible. Almost as bad as vaginal atrophy, you guys, which I talked about in another podcast.
It's pretty antiseptic.
Yeah, it was really clinical, but a D&C is a little surgery that you have, a little procedure that you have if you don't miscarry naturally, and you have to have that in order to remove the products of conception, as they call them, which is also a terrible word for it. Anyway, I think they told me I didn't need a D&C, and so I'd gone home. I'm guessing that's what happened, and then I woke up in the middle of the night. Well, actually, it was really early in the morning, like maybe 5 a.m, with just incredible pain. It felt like somebody was literally shoving a knife into me in my lower abdomen. It was so, so painful. And we had the 2 little kids, of course. Our kids were like 3. And I said to Rob, I think I have to go to the hospital. I don't know what's going on. Like, I couldn't stand up, and he couldn't drive me because we had these little kids, and it was like 4 a.m. or whatever. So I called a cab, and I took a cab to the hospital. And when I got there, they put me on morphine and basically determined that I had not actually miscarried properly. And I ended up having an emergency D&C, and came home, and we had told nobody about that pregnancy. And I do remember that one person said to me after that pregnancy, like literally right after the miscarriage, when we told them about the miscarriage, "Oh, that's so wonderful. You're trying again." And I remember thinking, that's not helpful. That is not helping me out right now, because I'm probably never going to have another baby. And I might not even try again, because I am currently completely devastated about this, 3rd loss. And then I think what happened is Rob said, "No more. We are not doing this anymore, because I can't watch you go through this anymore. Can't do it. I don't want to see you go through this anymore." And I went back on the pill. And that's when I left the practice of law, like shortly after that. And, in the course of all of this, by the way, I was also
life is still happening. Yeah.
Kicking ass in my legal career. Like, I was on big files with big stuff. We were getting ready for the Supreme Court of Canada. Like, there was all this stuff going on in my real life, that I was preparing for, and trying to go to work every day and just be happy and professional and focused, and never taking more than a day off for these things. I never took more than a day off that I can remember, maybe a couple days for the very first one when I was really surprised by it, I guess. But I wasn't taking leave when these things were happening. I was just going back to work. Anyway, we moved back to Halifax, and trying to remember the timing of this. last one. Okay. So
you've been in Halifax for a couple of years.
This one is a doozy. This one's going to need a few minutes to tell this story. So what happened was we decided we were not going to have any more kids. It was very tough for me. I was very sad about this. Often your partner and you are not on the same page. And obviously you kind of need to go with the partner who says, no, I don't think that's a recipe for a successful marriage to, get pregnant on the sly when your partner's not interested in having another child. So we had conversations. They were very respectful. We had come to a mutual agreement that we were not going to try to have another child. And Rob had decided to get a vasectomy, but you had to wait. So there was a wait list for that. And he was on it and he was scheduled to have it at some point. In the meantime, I decided to get an IUD, and I can't remember the reasons for that. There were some reasons for that, but I was going to get this IUD inserted. So I went to get the IUD inserted. You had to go see a gynecologist to get this done, and they inserted the IUD. And I don't remember the timing of this. I don't remember it's so funny how I just don't remember the details, but I was pregnant. They didn't do a pregnancy test. This is one thing I wanted to throw out there for healthcare professionals. Like, no one did a pregnancy test. I was 35, 36 years old, highly possible that I could just be pregnant, and nobody did a pregnancy test. They probably asked me if I was pregnant, and I would have said no, because I did not know I was pregnant. I wasn't trying to get pregnant. It was a kind of an accidental pregnancy. And, we'd actually made a decision not to get pregnant. So I did not expect to be pregnant, but they did nothing to check that. They put the IUD in, and then I found out I was pregnant. And then I went back to the gynecologist or my doctor or whatever, and they said, you can't keep the IUD in. If you keep the IUD in, this pregnancy will fail. So we have to remove the IUD, but there's a 30% risk of miscarriage when we remove the IUD. So then I had to go get the IUD removed, knowing it was likely going to cause another miscarriage. And it actually didn't, miraculously. And they did an ultrasound afterwards, and there was a viable heartbeat and everything looked great. And then I think we did another ultrasound after that, and everything still looked great at like 11 weeks. So Rob and I had wrapped our heads around the fact that we were actually going to have this third child. It felt really like we were probably going to have this third child. At the same time, my sister, I had told her that I was pregnant. And another good friend of ours was pregnant, and my sister had already had 2 kids, but she was thinking, well, maybe I'll have another kid. Maybe I'll have another kid, because I was now living in Nova Scotia where my sister was. And, we'd never had babies at the same time in the same place. And, and I think she just had started thinking about having a third child. She got pregnant, and, I guess this is the next piece of the story around the healthcare profession that needs to be said is this. I was a high-risk pregnancy because of the IUD thing. And I had to go to the high-risk pregnancy ultrasound room to get ultrasounds done for this pregnancy. The high-risk pregnancy ultrasound room is on the maternity floor of the hospital, or it was at the time. So you ride up in the elevator with pregnant people. You walk to your appointment, and there are hugely pregnant women all around you. There are women walking around with infants in their arms. So I had third ultrasound, which was the nuchal, which happens at like 13 and a half or 14 weeks or something. I had that ultrasound scheduled. We had told nobody except my sister, I think was the only one who knew. And you knew, obviously. And we went for this last ultrasound. But before I tell you about that ultrasound, at 11 and a half weeks, I knew something was wrong. This was my 5th pregnancy. I knew what a viable pregnancy felt like. I knew what it felt like when a pregnancy was no longer viable. And I felt very certain that something was wrong with this pregnancy. I went to see my GP, and I said to her, something is wrong. I know it. And she said something like, that's foolish. You just had an ultrasound 2 weeks ago or a week ago or whenever it was. I'm not ordering, because I had said to her, can you please get me another ultrasound? And she said, I'm not ordering another ultrasound for you. Everything is fine. And then something to the effect of, the worst thing that you can do for this pregnancy is worry about it. And I left. I remember leaving in tears, feeling foolish because she told me I was foolish, but at the same time, feeling like my pregnancy wasn't viable. So not so foolish, I guess. And then I had to wait for another 2 or 3 weeks for the ultrasound. And when we went to do the nuchal, of course, the pregnancy wasn't viable, and it hadn't been viable since 11 and a half weeks. So they can actually pinpoint when the embryo stopped
dividing or growing.
Yeah.
Or...
living, whatever. And it was basically the day that I went to the doctor and said something's wrong, or the day before, kind of thing. So if you're a healthcare professional out there, women who've been through this many times know what it feels like. And you know what? Even if they're wrong, there is nothing worse than being told that you're foolish and that you don't know what's going on in your own body. I knew exactly what was going on in my own body. I was exactly right about this. And if I had had an ultrasound that day, it would have prevented me from going through another 3 weeks of thinking that maybe I had a viable pregnancy. We went to the nuchal and we had this huge plan. On the way home, we had a list of all the people we were going to call and tell. I was so excited to tell everybody at that ultrasound. And of course, the baby was not alive. And then I had to tell everybody because I was completely gutted. I couldn't keep it together. So then you got to tell everybody anyway, because everybody needs to know why you're basically out of commission. So I wanted to tell those two healthcare things because those I have had lots of incredibly sensitive and lovely healthcare providers through all of this stuff I've been through, but I've also had some really insensitive stuff happen. I think we need to think a little bit more about where we put these high risk ultrasound and high risk, pregnancy clinics. I left that ultrasound. I remember leaving it and having to go down in the elevator with a couple with a baby, literally had just been discharged with their newborn baby. And I went down the elevator with them and Rob. So, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And also just the sensitivity around how you treat patients and women. I mean, we have pretty great intuition, I think, about our own bodies. And after all of the experience I had gone through, I knew when something was right and when something was wrong in a pregnancy. And that experience did not need to happen for me. And it made it a lot worse. After that pregnancy, things got really shitty. Do you remember that?
Yep.
I was not in a good headspace.
No, you weren't.
So I had to have a D&C, another one. And it was either 2 weeks or a week after that. Maybe it was even shorter than that. It might have even been a few days. It was ridiculous timing again. Rob had his vasectomy. So his vasectomy was booked for like 2 days after whatever. I can't remember the timing. It was ridiculous of that last D&C. So it was like, just in case you weren't sure, you're definitely not having a third child. Right. And of course I still had my two little ones to take care of in all of this. And you want to be, they were 5 at the time and I wanted to be, upbeat and a great mom for them. And and I was just a disaster. And then the other piece that was complicated that was going on at the same time was that my sister's pregnancy was proceeding and she ended up having a third child, who we love dearly. But that was really, really tough for me. And I know my sister would be okay with me talking about this, on this episode. I mean, I really struggled with the fact that the other person who I love the most, my other Megan, was pregnant and was proceeding through his pregnancy. And we had to have like a shower for her and everybody was celebrating that. And I was trying to come to terms with the fact that I was never going to have another child. And I was really angry. I had this insane amount of anger and it was like directed largely at her. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to see her. It was the weirdest thing because I'd never had that before in any of my other experiences. And I ended up having to go see a psychologist. I went for therapy. I had been to therapy before around the miscarriages, just around the grief part of it, but I'd never been to a therapist for anger. That's what I thought it was. Turns out it was just grief. Turns out it was just, one of the stages of grief. And the most helpful thing that therapist said to me was, you just have to call your sister up and tell her that you can't be with her right now. You need to just tell her that this is the way it is. And you need to work your way through this stuff. And at some point you'll be there, but you're not there right now. And you need some space. And that was a really hard conversation to have with my sister. It was devastating for her. I mean, imagine being her in all of this, a total innocent who was obviously just devastated when this happened to me. And then had to, go through the next 6 months pregnant. So that was tough. Those months were tough. We had to go through Christmas and all of that with her being pregnant and me not being pregnant. And, other people were getting pregnant all around me, of course, having babies. It took me a long time to get over that last one. And then we decided to try to adopt a third child.
I was going to ask you because I can remember that was the next phase was Nova Scotia provincial adoption.
Yeah. So we're not going to talk about that. That never ended up happening. We did not adopt a third child. Again, I can do an adoption episode at some point, maybe
but it was part of your grief process.
Definitely part of the grief process. And eventually we just got to the point where we realized that we were not going to have a third child, but it was a very long and tortuous period and a hard decision to come to. And I have always said this, like, I think it's hard whenever that you make the decision not to have the last child, whether the last child is the first child. So if you're making a decision as a couple, we're not going to have kids, on balance, this isn't what we want. That's a really tough decision.
Huge decision,
right? Whether it's the decision after one child, we're not going to try to have another child. We're going to have one child. That's a really tough decision to make. It's a tough decision to make after 2 kids. I'm sure it was a tough decision for you to make after 3, not to have 4 kids. For me, it was a really hard decision to not keep trying for that third kid, especially because I was only 36 or 37. So I felt like there was still a shot for me. I wasn't 40, 41, 42. I was still, I was geriatric in terms of the maternal scale, but I still felt kind of young and my friends were all still having kids. So that was really tough. Anyway, we now have, obviously we have 2 great kids and we're very happy that we have those kids, but that was my story of recurrent miscarriage. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts around what kind of insight do you have around supporting? I mean, how many women do you know who've gone through this, Megan?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I don't know the number because it's a lot of women, but I know like one of the outcomes of Wendy's story is that a girlfriend of mine ended up adopting through the same agency that Wendy adopted through. So, the outcome of the stories is different for everyone. Some end with natural pregnancies, some end with adoption, some end with no babies. But I think ultimately the thing that you can do as the person who's supporting the person is just treat the person the way you would always treat them.
Right.
So, and throughout throughout your process, I was continuing to have babies. So, I don't think I was you weren't angry with me because of the timing of my pregnancies was different than the timing of your sister's pregnancies. Yeah. And my last baby was when you were having your baby. So,
I was never angry with you. I never felt that. And it wasn't anger at Megan.
No, I know. But I think the point is that you have to allow that person to have the space to have whatever emotion they're having. So if it seems like anger, or if it seems like, being gutted or indifference, you just have to allow the person who's going through that process to feel those things, because what they're feeling is real.
Yeah, totally. It really is grief, which comes in, there's so many different stages of grief and it shows up in really weird ways. And for some of them, I think I just moved through a bunch of the stages quickly. And then in others, I got stuck in them for longer. And
all 4 of those experiences were at different stages in your life. And so the way I needed to support you was different every time.
Right.
Because life was different every time.
Yeah. That's
what you needed was different every time. So it's not like, your first loss was different from your 4th loss.
And I would say too, like, just in terms of like easy language that people can take away from this podcast that they can use if they know someone who's gone through this or is going through this, is just to ask, what do you need?
Right.
What do you need from me right now? What can I do to support you in this?
Or like in Drew's instance.
Yeah.
Right. Like Drew, because you guys were friends, but you weren't super tight.
No.
And so her just not asking you what you needed and just making an assumption was the right assumption to make.
Yeah.
Right. Like write some stuff down, or, like I'm sure if she had left a note that said, here's a Starbucks card, go for a walk and get a coffee at the end of it. Like, just making some assumptions about what people need and just offering them up that maybe don't involve words, like a cookbook or, I don't know.
No, it's really just about showing the person that you're thinking about them and that you care. I don't think you can go wrong by just dropping a note or a little gift, something that just says like, I'm thinking about you right now. I mean, that's really all it's about. You can't fix it. You can't help them get through it faster. There is no right thing to say. It's just about, I almost think it's the opposite. Don't try to fix it.
Right. And like, even when I think about your mom's loss, it was more like just a note to say hi.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like I'm trying to fix this or change things or get you to not think about your grief. It's like, just, I know you're grieving and I'm just saying hi.
Yeah.
I'm just
checking in.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And just, at some point that person will probably be ready to pour their heart out, and other times you'll just probably sit there. I'm sure we sat there in silence many times, or talked about stuff that had nothing to do with what I was going through.
Yep. And, from your perspective with Ella, especially, even through your loss, Ella was still your girl. Mm-hmm. So not keeping Ella from you, because Ella was actually in some ways maybe a solace for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. So if you're not sure whether something is going to be a great thing for somebody, ask them. Hey, we're having this baby shower for our mutual friend next month. I know you've been through a lot of tough stuff recently. Would it be easier for you to not come, or would you?
Yeah. Do you want to come or not come? I'll bring your gift if you can't come.
Yeah.
And if you want to come, I'll sit next to you.
And if you don't want to come, I'm happy to go pick up a gift from you and get a card and sign it from you and just, do it all. Like what?
And if you want to go, I'll give you a wink from across the room if I feel like something might be tough.
Exactly. So I think it's about just being really honest and recognizing that it's not about you, and you're not expected to know what the right thing is to do. There is not for sure one right way to do anything in this. And it really is all about what the person actually needs in the moment from you. It's okay to be vulnerable and say, I've never been through this before and I don't know how to support you, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. And if there's anything that I can do for you, I want you to tell me what that is, and I will do it.
And I also think, as a support person who's having kids, you just have to have your kids.
Yes.
And me having my kids was completely independent from you not having the outcome you wanted. Like, I couldn't look at my having kids as a reason not to spend time with you, because we still loved each other.
Of course.
And my life was still moving forward. And so,
yeah. And I wanted to have relationships with your kids. And I wanted to have a relationship with my niece, who's now,
who you have a great relationship.
10, 11. I'm going to get it wrong. It's been a long time since that last miscarriage. It's been well over 10 years now. So
yeah, but Stella had actually nothing to do with anything.
No,
right? Like,
nothing. No,
yeah,
nothing to do with anything. And this was just all the stuff that I had to go through. And then life just keeps on happening, and you have to figure out how to deal with all the stuff that's happening in life around you. But if you're supporting someone who's going through this and struggling with this, and it's the same with infertility, by the way. Infertility it's the same, whether you've had a pregnancy and lost it, or whether you're really struggling to conceive. It's all of the stuff I'm talking about. It's at least from my experience in speaking to women who struggled with infertility, all the same sensitivities apply, all the same things apply. There is no right way to support someone. There are lots of things that it's not helpful to say.
Right.
But there are, really it's all about trying to meet the person where they are, ask them what they need, and just be there for them, and just let them know that you care. That's really all that
right. And especially, I think it's important to realize, because fertility and recurrent pregnancy loss are not one-offs, right? So because they're not one-offs, you have to consider all of the rest of life that's happening, and how to support a person as life continues, as you became a partner. So all of those things change how you support someone.
Yeah, that's true. Changed over time.
Yeah.
And then, there's the like we said, there's the final piece of grief in this story happened when we made the final decision to pull ourselves off the adoption list here. That was when all of this kind of concluded for us. And it took me a long time to process that and be okay with that. That was really hard. Our kids were invested in that. They knew we were trying to adopt. We had to basically break their hearts too, which was really hard. There was a lot involved in that last process. And then as I said, it took significant time after that for me to feel like I was okay to just talk about it like this. But I did want to do this podcast today because I wanted to share this. I want anyone who's listening, who's gone through this, to know that you're not alone in this. I feel you. I've been there.
I feel you.
I'm crying now. Because it's so hard. And I see, even I'm still sometimes triggered. I see actually just I'm watching the show now. I like to let people know what shows I'm watching because we're still in the pandemic. At least we are here in Nova Scotia, and Megan is in Alberta, which is
So
worst province. Worst province in the country. Yeah. Full panic. So I'm sharing my pandemic watches. I'm watching this series called The Restaurant, which is a beautiful Swedish series. It's subtitled, but I promise you the subtitles are not distracting. It's such a good show. There is a pregnancy loss in that. And I was just bawling watching that, just thinking about the loss and the grandmother who had made the socks, and, because it's not just your loss either. And I think that's another thing to remember. Like, there are all kinds of other people who are grieving in this when you're grieving.
Well, I was just thinking, so when you lost your first pregnancy, when we were in West Hillhurst, it was, and maybe this is selfish and it's not, and it wasn't about me, but it was also a loss of our collective having babies at the same time, and so how do I support you when I'm actually having my own loss about us walking our babies down the road together, and making sure that was never part of the story that I wanted to share with you. So I'm sharing it with you now, but loss is weird.
Yeah. And everyone who's associated with you feels some degree of loss, and it's different. My parents grieved every time I had a miscarriage. Rob's parents grieved. It was hard for my sister who was having kids through this process as well. She came out in the summer, I feel like, and I saw her, and she was pregnant the summer before Duncan.
With Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was born in March. So that makes sense. And I was not, of course, pregnant with Georgia at that point. I'd already had a couple of miscarriages, and she came out and she was pregnant, and that was hard. I was excited to see her. I was happy we were on the wait list for the adoption, and we'd finally finished all of that process to get on the list. But I was also super nervous. We were never going to get placed with a baby, and that we would never have a family. I mean, I was very, very worried that was going to be the situation. So that was tough. And she went through her own, I'm sure, grief every time I had a loss. So, and then anybody who's ever had a miscarriage goes through a whole different kind of grief when somebody they love goes through a miscarriage.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah. I've never had that experience, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that would.
I feel like it is. I mean, I don't know because I am that person who's had miscarriages, but I feel like it's probably different. I have a whole different level.
I'm sure it is.
Empathy, I think, for somebody going through that. So, that's the other piece of it. It is complicated. Now, this podcast is probably going to air after Mother's Day, but I feel like we need to say this because Mother's Day is coming up in a couple of weeks. And I think it's really important just to close the podcast out by talking about sensitivity around Mother's Day. I have been on the wrong end of this more than once. And it's really important to remember that Mother's Day is a really freaking tough day for a lot of women. Really hard. It's really hard for anybody who's struggling to have a family and has not been able to conceive. It's struggling for anyone who has had miscarriages. It's a struggle, obviously, for anyone who's lost a child. It's devastating. It is tough for the grandmas out there who have had their daughters have had multiple losses. It's tough for the birth moms who gave up the babies. And, it's tough for so many groups of women, and we never think about it. I always try to be sensitive to that on Mother's Day because I've been on the other side of that. I've had so many very sad Mother's Days. I've had really sad Mother's Days when I've actually been a mother.
Mother's Day is weird.
Yeah.
Depends on your relationship with your own mother.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, there's that too, right? Your relationship with your mother can make Mother's Day really hard. So I just want to remind people of that as we go through another Mother's Day here, and just remember this maybe when you get to the next one. You have to be really sensitive at Mother's Day as well. And all of these, I get it. I know why you feel like you have to do it, but social media is not a friendly place for anyone who's ever gone through anything. That's the truth of it. And we've all gone through something. So
yeah. And I was going to say anything is actually anything.
Yeah. Everybody, right?
Yeah.
If you're on there, you're going to see stuff that's triggering, and Mother's Day is not a great day to be on social media if you're somebody who has struggled to be a mother or has any loss associated with mothering. It's a really, really tough one. So I just throw that out there, like, be sensitive, like posting all the photos of you and your amazing kids and not telling the backstory. Like, if you're going to do it, be honest about it. Be honest. Don't just share the good stuff. Share it. Let's start talking about this more often. 1 in 4 is the statistic for miscarriage. And as I said, I actually think that's probably conservative, because I think a lot of pregnancies end really early and get confused with a late period, to be perfectly honest. And I don't know if we'll ever have the completely accurate data on that, but even if it's 1 in 4, that means that you know women who have gone through this. You know lots of women who have gone through this. And there's a pretty good chance that you've gone through it yourself, or that you might, if you're still in the early years. So I just wanted to close with that, the Mother's Day thing, but also other days. Because if you're like me, which I think every pregnant woman does this, you mark out every milestone when you're pregnant. You mark out when the baby's going to be born. For a long time, I knew the due dates of all of these babies. I don't anymore, thank God. But for a long time, the due date would come around, and I would, every year, Absolutely. I would remember those dates. And I also, all of the other holidays and just celebratory moments that were, that I had planned. Again, it's the loss of the dream. It's the grief around the loss of the family that you didn't get, the child that you didn't get. That's really hard. So you have to be sensitive around all of this stuff. Anyway, that's my story. Is there anything you want to add to it, Megan?
I don't think so. Just that I love you.
Thank you. I love you too. Thank you for doing this episode with me. Love to hear what you think of this episode. If you found it helpful, if there's, if you have a story that you want to share, feel free to send me a message. You can always email me at wendy@wendymccallum.com, or DM me through any of my social media channels. I love hearing from you guys, and I appreciate you as always. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Bye, Meg.
Bye, girl.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. If you've been putting yourself last for way too long and are worried that you're burning out, grab your free burnout checklist at www.wendymccallum.com/checklist. That's www.wendymccallum.com/checklist.